Some people spend their whole lives building something, and the people closest to them never even notice. They see what they want to see. A quiet woman, a devoted wife, someone easy to overlook. That's exactly what the Calloway children thought about Margaret. And that mistake, that single catastrophic assumption, would cost them everything. Robert Calloway died on a Tuesday in early November. He was 71 years old, sharp-minded until nearly the very end, and by every account, a man who had loved 2 women deeply in his life. His first wife, Patricia, who passed from cancer in 1997, and Margaret, the woman he married 4 years later and never stopped talking about. Margaret was 63 when she became a widow. She had spent 32 years working as a school librarian before retiring to help Robert manage their home outside of Billings, Montana. She was not glamorous. She was not loud. She wore the same brand of cardigan in 5 different colors and kept a garden that won a local prize 2 years running. She was, by any measure, easy to underestimate. Robert's children, his son Derek, his daughter Simone, and his youngest, Carter, had never fully accepted her. Not in 30 years. They were polite at holidays. They sent birthday cards signed with first names only. No love, no warmth. They tolerated her the way you tolerate weather. But when Robert died, the tolerance ended. The funeral was on a Saturday. Margaret remembers standing at the grave in the cold, her hands folded, and feeling Derek's eyes on her from across the casket. Not grief in those eyes. Calculation. He approached her before the cars even pulled away from the cemetery. "We should talk soon," he said, "about the house. Not, 'I'm sorry for your loss.' Not, 'How are you holding up?' Just, we should talk about the house." Margaret nodded and said, "Of course." She didn't say anything else. She had learned over 30 years that silence was often the most powerful response available to her. The calls started within the week. Derek, as the eldest, had appointed himself the family's legal voice, despite having no legal training whatsoever. He sent Margaret a letter, typed and formatted to look official, suggesting that she consider transitioning out of the property within 60 days, as the estate would need to be assessed and distributed among Robert's heirs. Margaret read the letter twice. Then she folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and called her friend Ruth, who had been her closest friend since 1987. "Can we meet for coffee? Derek sent me a letter," she said. "What kind of letter?" "I will tell you all about it when we meet." They met at Marble Coffee Company an hour later. When they finally had their coffee and had sat at a table in the bustling coffee shop, Ruth asked again, "What kind of letter did you get?" "The kind that's meant to scare someone who doesn't know any better." Ruth asked if she was scared. "Not even slightly," Margaret said. And that was the truth, though even Margaret didn't yet fully understand why. Simone called the following Thursday. Her approach was softer than Derek's, wrapped in sympathy the way a pill gets wrapped in peanut butter. She talked about how hard this must be, how overwhelming, how perhaps it would be a relief not to have to manage such a large property alone. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that she knew a realtor, a good one, someone who could move things quickly. Carter didn't call at all. He sent a text. It said, "Hey Margaret, Derek says you got his letter. Just want you to know we all think it's the right move. No hard feelings." No hard feelings. 30 years. 30 years of holidays and graduations and hospital waiting rooms. 30 years of being the woman who kept their father happy, who made his house a home, who sat beside him through 2 surgeries and one very dark winter when he'd lost most of his savings in a bad investment. No hard feelings. Margaret set down her phone. She looked out the window at the garden Robert had helped her plant. Then she called the attorney. Robert's attorney was a man named Gerald Foss. He had been Robert's lawyer for over 20 years, and he was one of those rare people who managed to be both completely professional and genuinely kind at the same time. He called Margaret 3 days after she reached out and asked her to come in the following Monday. He told her the full family would be present. Standard procedure. Margaret arrived 10 minutes early. Derek, Simone, and Carter arrived together. They sat on one side of the conference table. Margaret sat on the other, alone, with her hands folded in her lap. Gerald Foss cleared his throat and began. The house, the property outside Billings that Margaret and Robert had shared for 28 years, was left entirely to Margaret in perpetuity, with no conditions. Derek shifted in his chair. Simone's smile went tight. Robert's personal vehicle, his tools, and his collection of first-edition westerns were to be divided equally among his 3 children. Carter nodded like this was acceptable, like he was being gracious about it. Then Gerald Foss paused. He removed a second document from the folder. He set it on the table and looked up, first at Margaret, then at the others. Robert has asked that I read this next section in full, he said. He was quite specific about that. Robert Calloway had started buying investment properties in 1994. Not flashy ones, not commercial real estate or luxury developments. Small residential rentals, duplexes, modest single-family homes, a small apartment building in Billings. He bought them quietly, held them, improved them slowly, and let the rent accumulate over 3 decades. By the time of his death, he held 11 properties generating collectively just over $42,000 per month in rental income. Every dollar of that income for the last 18 years had been deposited into an account held jointly in the names of Robert Calloway and Margaret Calloway. Margaret had known the account existed. She had not known what was in it. Gerald Foss slid a 1-page summary across the table toward her. The account balance was $2,461,000. Margaret looked at the number. She looked at it for a long time. Then Gerald Foss turned to the final page. Robert also held a separate asset, he said, which he acquired in 2003 and has maintained since. It was his intention that this asset transfer solely and completely to his wife Margaret upon his death, with no claim permitted by any other party. He looked at the children. The asset is a working cattle ranch in Fergus County, Montana, approximately 1,800 acres, currently leased to an operating rancher under a long-term agreement. The annual lease income is, at present, $214,000. The room was very quiet. Robert wanted me to convey something directly, Gerald said. He picked up a handwritten note, Robert's handwriting, unmistakable. He read it aloud. Margaret never asked me for anything. In 30 years, she never asked me for a single thing except my company. Everything here is hers because everything here was built for her, even when she didn't know it. I hope it takes care of her the way she took care of me. Derek tried to contest the will. He hired an attorney who sent several strongly worded letters, questioning the validity of Robert's mental state at the time the documents were drawn. Gerald Foss responded to each one with calm, thorough documentation, including letters from Robert's physician, his accountant, and 2 witnesses present at the signing, all confirming that Robert Calloway was of entirely sound mind and had been planning this arrangement for years. The contest went nowhere. Simone called Margaret once after the reading. She didn't apologize. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. Margaret told her there weren't. That was true, actually. Margaret was not a bitter woman. She didn't lie awake enjoying their humiliation. She simply went on living, in the house she loved, in the garden she'd built, with a bank account that meant she would never have to worry again, and a ranch in Montana she planned to visit in the spring. Carter never reached out at all. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. Robert Calloway didn't build that fortune as a surprise. He didn't do it to punish his children. He did it because he paid attention. For 30 years, he watched his wife show up, quietly, consistently, without asking for credit, and he decided, quietly, to make sure she would be okay.
The cruelty of the children wasn't that they tried to take what was his. It's that they spent 30 years looking at Margaret and seeing nothing worth respecting. They never looked closely enough to wonder what Robert saw in her. They never thought to ask. And Robert, being Robert, never felt the need to explain. He let the will do the talking. If you're watching this, you probably know someone like Margaret. Or maybe you are someone like Margaret. The person in the room who gets overlooked, who people assume has nothing because she doesn't perform having something. Pay attention to those people. They're usually the ones the room should have been paying attention to all along. Thanks for listening. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There are more where this came from.